So Detroit has had a completely different experience during these turbulent times. Also the fact that, I think many of us still remember 67. We've never recovered from the riots of 67. And I don't think Detroiters have an appetite to tear their community up once again, because we know how long it takes to recover from that.
Wayne County Sheriff Benny Napoleon, welcome to One Detroit.
How you doing, Nolan?
I'm doing well and hope you are.
I'm doing fine.
Benny, we've of course seen over the last couple of weeks the demonstrations against police brutality, outpourings in communities big and small across the nation. There's clearly something happening, and I wanted your perspective. You've been in law enforcement all your life, all your career. Is there a problem with the police, Benny?
Well, what is happening now is that the imperfections of police departments are becoming much more visible. The things that officers do wrong is now being captured very much in real time sometimes. So anything that happens that is not really up to the standards of the community is now right there in front of us so quickly that people are getting a chance to react to the imperfections. But we've had issues in law enforcement, as you may be aware of. And one of the things that I teach is that the legacy of law enforcement, unfortunately, throughout this country is one of corruption and abuse. The corruption is coming to light more so now than in the past, but it's not as prevalent as people think it is or the way it looks. But you take a police department the size of Detroit's. When I was there, it was about 4,600 people. If 10% of those officers were corrupt, it would look like the entire department was going crazy. That would be about 450 cops. That just was not the case. I had about 1 or 2% who were giving me the majority of my problems at that time. But overwhelmingly, the officers are doing an exceptional job. It's just that when it's law enforcement, because of this critical nature of what we do, the results are amplified.
So, Benny, as you mentioned, you've been in law enforcement for decades.
45 years.
45 years. You have now more African-American police officers, more African-Americans in charge of police departments. Are things, in terms of racial sensitivity, relations with the community, diversity on the force, things gotten better over that period or not?
Oh, absolutely. It's gotten better in those agencies that reflect the community. One of the reasons I believe that Detroit had the protests, but we did not have the violence and disruption in our community, is because for about 47 years, we've been working on creating a relationship with the community, and people have relatives, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, uncles and aunts, nieces and nephews, friends, church members, people they've gone to school with that are in the community that they know, and they recognize that all police officers aren't bad, but they know that there's some that are. But majority of the ones they know are people who love the community, love what they do. So Detroit has had a completely different experience during these turbulent times. Also the fact that, I think many of us still remember 67. We've never recovered from the riots of 67. And I don't think Detroiters have an appetite to tear their community up once again, because we know how long it takes to recover from that.
Sheriff, is there something fundamentally wrong with the way we police?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have to have standards for recruiting, hiring, training, and retention that should be national. Police departments and how they do recruiting, hiring, training, and retention, it's different all over the country. I believe that we should have a national standard, a minimum standard that folks have to meet. I believe that we should, as communities, one of the things that I'm very strong on is residency. I believe that a community should be able to require police officers who are policing their community to live in that community. And I think that if you live in a community, you're going to be much more sensitive to the people who live there because they're your neighbors. They go to school with your children. They play with your children. You may attend the same schools or churches or shop in the same places. And I think that that's one of the things that we really need to look at. So there's a lot of problems when it comes to training. There needs to be national training standards. There are just some things that should be consistent throughout all police departments at a bare minimum.
Sheriff, you mentioned at the start a very small percentage of bad police officers. You said 1% to 2% or less. But as the head of a law enforcement agency, how do you find those bad cops and get rid of them, deal with them before problems occur?
Recruiting, hiring, training, retention.
Mm-hmm.
We need to work on what people we are forced to retain. Oftentimes, folks that we have tried to fire, we are not able to get rid of them because of the strong union contracts that exist. I've had, even in disciplinary issues, I remember finding a guy who killed a kid, a 12-year-old, and he was given his job back in arbitration. And there was nothing I could do about that.
Well, that was the case in Minneapolis with the officer who choked George Floyd. Apparently it had been cited for incidents many times in his career and was still on the force. How common is that?
It's more uncommon than those of us in leadership would like. It is, I think there was a prominent lawyer back in the 70s and 80s who said that a Detroit police officer has more avenues of appeal than a person on death row. And that shows the frustration of leadership. And that person was one of the department's lawyers. And it's just a difficult thing. People inherently want to trust and believe in police officers, even when leadership believes that those people should not be a part of the agency.
Sheriff, when you hear these calls to defund or dismantle police agencies, what does that mean to you? What do you think people are talking about when they talk about defunding police?
Well, it could be one or two things. It could be seriously defund and we don't have a police department, which is what I am hearing when I hear it, which I find very difficult to conceive that you're going to have communities that don't have police departments. I just don't see how that works. And if that is what they're saying, first and fundamentally, I believe that policing is a local function, that people should have a right to determine how they're policed. We don't determine as police officers how to police a community. We work for the community. They don't work for us. So we have to police in a manner that's acceptable to the community that we're serving. That being said, I have seen gangbangers, murderers, drug dealers, rapists, carjackers, B&E men who are not afraid of the police. I've never seen one that was afraid of their neighbor, that was really concerned that their neighbor was going to come and do anything to them. And if that is what folks who talk about defunding the police is talking about, some citizen group that's going to go to the local carjacker or sex offender or person like that and say, hey, you better act nice, else we're going to do what? I assure you, they're not going to listen to them because, quite frankly, many of them are not afraid of us. So if that's what they mean by defunding, then if that's what they choose to do, obviously the community has a right to do it. What I think I'm hearing is go away from funding certain aspects of policing that people may not be happy with. And the community also has a right to do that. But one of the things that I think is wrong with policing is that they're not properly funded. That's part of the problem because it costs, especially in major departments, it costs a lot of money to train. It costs a lot of money to hire the right people. It costs a lot of money to retain the right people, especially now, since we no longer have defined benefit pensions and benefit packages. Officers now can get up and move from agency to agency to agency based upon where they see the best working conditions. Trying to retain people now and good people is a very difficult thing because they can take a lot of their benefits with them, and they are doing that now. They could also mean we'll get rid of our city police department and let the county sheriff do it. In my particular case, I have a lot more control over my officers who work the street than a police department does. And I say that because of this. All police officers in my agency get their police authority from me, the sheriff. Even though they're certified by the state, I can take that power from them and put them in the jail and turn them basically into a corrections officer. So officers who work on the street for me, like if the officer we're talking about was working the street for me, I could deal with him very easily. You getting in too much trouble on the street, get off the street, you're going into jail. I'm going to replace you with somebody who's a lot more friendly. Now, I think that has happened in some places around the country because sheriffs tend to have more control over their personnel than a local police chief, because the only thing you can do with a police officer like in Detroit is if you take them off the street, you put them in a desk job where you're paying them to do basically clerical work, and they're highly overpaid. But that's the only thing you can really do to them if you can't dismiss them. So there are people who want to have sheriffs do it because sheriffs have more control. And for another reason, I'm elected. If you don't like what I'm doing, it's easy to get rid of me. You just go to the poll and vote me out. So, we have to be more sensitive to the community. So I don't know what they're saying, but those are some of the scenarios that I think they might mean.
Sheriff, we've seen a lot of people demonizing the police over the last couple of weeks, a lot of anger directed at officers at every level in every department. Do you feel that your department or police in general have the support still of the overall community?
Absolutely. If you look at the numbers, while they look large on television, when you look at the number of people, like in Detroit, with the last group of protests, I think the largest protest number I saw was they said there may have been 1,000 people. There are 2 million people that live in Wayne County. And you have to keep that in perspective. Certainly it looks like a lot of discontent and that a lot of people are upset, but there are 2 million people who live in Wayne County. You didn't see numbers like that out in any place. If you look at Philadelphia, you look at New York, you look at Chicago, you look at LA, where they have populations in way larger than ours, you had a few thousand people out there protesting. So I do believe that we still have considerable support among law-abiding citizens. They do want change. I'm not saying they agree that there's not a problem, but I think they believe that we can do better in policing, and we can. But the changes that people are going to ask for, Nolan, are going to be expensive. And people have to decide whether they really want to pay for that.
Now, Sheriff, what changes can we expect in the Wayne County Sheriff's Department and other local agencies coming out of this? What do you expect?
We have to do better at hiring. I have 200 vacancies in my agency today. 200. I have money to hire the 200. I can't find 200 people to take the job.
Let me stop right there and ask, what happened over the last couple of weeks with the demonization of the police, the attacks on police? Several officers have been killed around the country. That make it tougher to get people to take these jobs?
Absolutely. All of that's going to factor in. There was a time when Detroit and Wayne County were among the highest paid. Now we're among the lowest paid. We're asking people to take two of the toughest law enforcement jobs in the state at much lower pay. We have, in getting to retention, we have people who come into our agency just to get their foot in the door, and as soon as they can get into another agency that has better pay and better benefits, they leave. And those are oftentimes the kind of officers that we would like to retain. Training. It costs a lot of money to train police officers, because when you take them out of their position to train police officers, you have to either replace that person or do without. In my case, I have to do without because I have nobody to replace them with, because I'm already 200 people short. So those are the kinds of things that are happening in policing. We need better. We need to, first of all, we need to hire and recruit better. We need to train better. And we have to look at retaining good people in the agency and being able to get rid of bad people that we oftentimes as leaders know are people that we should not have. in our midst. But obviously the labor folks, the police unions, are trying to support their people. And privately, I will tell you that they will say, you know, we recognize this person's not a good person. However, it's one of our members, they pay dues. So they're in a catch-22. And privately, I've had union people tell me, hey, we understand why you're doing it, Sheriff, but we have to represent our membership.
Sheriff Benny Napoleon, thanks for joining us today on One Detroit.
Thank you, Nolan. It's a pleasure.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.